Responsibility. That's a big word that people throw around. You need to be responsible. What about self-responsibility? I think that's even more important because how can you be responsible if you aren't being responsible for yourself? What's going on YouTube? Welcome back to Modern Day Musing. My name's Tom, and this channel is all about emphasizing the need for deep reflection in modern society to better understand ourselves and the complex world around us. Today's video is a bit of a new video style I'm going to do. I'm going to be breaking down a podcast of a couple of clips I recently watched about Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan talking about his message of self-responsibility, which I first heard about almost 2 years ago, September 2016, and it's really helped me, and I'm starting to really use it and utilize this whole theory of taking accountability for yourself and not comparing yourself too much to others, etc., etc. I'll let him explain, and I'll comment in between, and then at the end I'll add my thoughts, my final thoughts. Let's get into it, guys.
This is from 12 Rules for Life. Rule 4 is compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
Yes.
Because you need to have a hierarchy of improvement. You need to be aiming for something, and that means you're going to be lesser than people who've already attained along that dimension.
Yes.
And that can give rise to envy. So the question is, who should you defeat in the final analysis? And the answer is you should defeat your former self. You should be constantly trying to do that. And you're the right control for yourself too, because you're the one who's had all your advantages and disadvantages. And so if you want to compete fairly with someone, then you should be competing with you.
So right away you see his theory of don't compare yourself to someone today, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, so that you don't get envious or jealous like I talked about in my last video. That's so important, right? Maybe draw inspiration from other people, and wow, what they're doing is great, but no, don't do comparisons about how does that relate to me or get insecure, well, I'm not like them. Because as he says, they have a not totally, but a different circumstance. You don't know all their advantages and disadvantages that they bring to the table. Whereas with yourself, if you're honest with yourself, you are well aware of your advantages and disadvantages and your strengths and your weaknesses, if you're able to humble yourself and start to be more realistic. And they're going to talk about a bit more of the importance in this next clip. And this one's a bit longer, bear with them. He uses some intense language, and I'll talk about why at the end.
And you might say, well, what's the right way of being in the world, if there is such a thing? And it's not acting according to a set of rules. It's attempting continually to transcend the flawed thing that you currently are. And what's so interesting about that is that the meaning in life is to be found in that pursuit. So I've been laying that out in these discussions too, because I say, well, the fundamental issue is that life is tragic and difficult, very tragic and difficult for everyone. And it's also tainted by malevolence, because no matter how things are tragic and difficult, but there's always some stupid thing that you could do or someone else could do that could make it even worse than it has to be. And so that's life. And you need an antidote to that, because that can embitter you. Constant contact with that. Just the tragedy, but the tragedy combined with betrayal and malevolence, that makes it even worse, especially if it's self-induced. Okay, so you need something to set against that so you don't get bitter and resentful. Well, what do you set against that? Doing something worthwhile, by your own definition, say. You need some reason to get the hell out of bed on a terrible day because you've got something good to do. Well, what's the best thing you can do? Transcend your current wretched and miserable self. There's meaning to be found in that, and that's a meaning that's associated with responsibility. One of the things that I've been trying to lay out clearly is that life is hard. It's tainted by malevolence and betrayal. That can make you bitter. You need a meaning to offset that. Where's the meaning to be found? Not in rights, not in impulsive pleasure, but in responsibility. You take responsibility for yourself, so you take care of yourself. If you're good at it, you have some excess left over to take care of your damn family. If you're good at both of those, then you have some excess left over to take care of your community. Those are heavy burdens. You pick up the burdens, you find that's meaningful. The best way to pick up the burden is to continually improve yourself. And that's where the meaning is to be found. And so that meaning is in the continual self-transcendence. That's letting your old self die and the new self be reborn.
Alright, so as I said, he uses some very intense language to transcend your former wretched self. And when you first hear that, it's like, wow, this is kind of negative. Like, I didn't know I was that bad. But he explains later in the podcast the meaning why he uses such extreme language is because he's trying to make it work for someone who's in a low or someone who's maybe in a middle ground, but it has to work for the person who's in a low, right? And yeah, that whole process of trying to get better each and every day, trying to transcend your former self, and how that gives meaning into your life. And why I find that so valuable is because, first of all, it was honest, and then he also, another layer of honesty he adds to it is that life isn't all roses, isn't all sunshine, isn't always good times. There's bad things that happens. He even goes as far like malevolence and all this suffering, all of these things that are true, but we don't want to think about, and at least we don't think about enough, especially when you're being raised. It's not really taught, and that's because you're younger, so you're innocent. But even when you're in high school and you're going through it already, it's not really talked about. It's just danced around because it's too awkward a conversation to have, or too hard a conversation to have, and maybe even some of the teachers aren't ready to have it. That's another thing. Like, you think of teachers as these people who are all put together. Some of them are just young adults themselves, right? And I have only recently realized that. So it takes a person like Jordan, who's actually done a lot of research, a lot of studying, a lot of failing to be able to say something as honest as that. And then he adds a beautiful ending to it where, hey, if you start sorting yourself out, taking responsibility for yourself, that'll give you purpose, but then you can also start helping your family, your friends maybe, and society ultimately, like a high goal. So you see how it builds and builds, and that's a great meaning. And he's gonna add on to that right now with another clip that'll be a bit more optimistic.
Well, I don't know how to start improving my life. Someone might say that. And I would say, well, you're not aiming low enough. There's something you could do that you are regarding as trivial, that you could do, that you would do, that would result in an actual improvement. But it's not a big enough improvement for you, so you won't lower yourself enough to take the opportunity. Aim low. And I don't mean don't aim, and I don't mean don't aim up. But you have to accept the fact that you can set yourself a goal that you can attain, and there's not going to be much glory in it to begin with. Because if you're not in very good shape, the goal that you could attain tomorrow isn't very glorious. But it's a hell of a lot better than nothing, and it beats the hell out of bitterness, and it's way better than blaming someone else. It's way less dangerous. And you could do it, and it starts to compound on you. So a small step today puts you in a position to take a slightly bigger step the next day, and then that puts you in a position to take a slightly bigger step the next day. And you do that for 2 or 3 years, man, you're starting to stride.
All right, so I don't think I can say it any better than that, or need to analyze that clip. That's the light at the end of the tunnel. That's what I wanted to end it on with his discussion. And now I'm just gonna do my final thoughts, my takeaway about self-responsibility and progression. Okay, so all I wrote on the board here was self-responsibility and progress. They're linked. I think that's pretty obvious. But what self-responsibility really is, I mean, responsibility is kind of duties and what you have to do, or if you're responsible, you're doing the right things, you're doing things that you need to do, not just what you want to do. Well, what about with yourself? When you put self in front of that word, self-responsibility, that's the duty you owe to yourself to progress, I guess, and to do the things that will improve yourself. And so I wrote self-responsibility equals here. And to me, it's an equation pretty simple, and you can add to this if you think there's something else. And I can probably think of one right now that I didn't write down. So honest self-reflection plus realistic goal setting plus action plus fortitude, and right now as I'm thinking, plus passion. And now let me explain. So honest self-reflection, that is where it starts off, and that means, as he said, humbling yourself, being honest with yourself, and not setting a huge unattainable goal. Do the little things first. Honestly evaluate your pros and your cons, so what you're good at, what you're bad at, which is way easier said than done. Because for me, I don't want to think that I'm too good at something, maybe overvalue or overestimate my ability at something. And also, everyone doesn't want to talk about what they're bad at or what they need to work on. I mean, that's the ego part of us. But by doing this, you will slowly get better at it. And I mean, for example, with me, you do some self-reflection, and it's part of why I wanted to make the channel, right? It's, hey, you don't put yourself out there enough. How are you? You've got all these thoughts, you maybe have all these goals, but guess what? Action, right? That's the third part of this equation. You've got to start acting. So like being not hard on yourself, being honest with yourself. Like, look, you could have the most brilliant idea, and I'm sure people have, but did they act on them? No. You got to take that leap. Secondly, realistic goal setting. So yeah, as he says, walk, take little strides, do the little trivial things, and eventually you'll be striding, you'll be fully striding, and you'll be on your way to what you want, that bigger goal that you have. But first you've got to honestly reflect to figure out what those goals are. And that's why musing, my channel idea, also comes into play. And then action, obviously, once you've honestly reflected, once you've realistically set some goals, you've got to act on them, because nothing's solidified without action, of course. And I put fortitude because you have to have the courage, the perseverance. As Jordan says, things aren't always going to be easy, but that's all right as long as you stick with it. And how do you stick with it? I would add that right now, add something right now. Passion. If you're passionate about what you're doing or some things that you do, you're trying to have as much passion in your life as possible with the relationships, so the friends and loved ones you have, the romantic side, and also the activities you do. If you have as much passion as possible in your life, that'll allow you to have the fortitude and to be able to persevere through the hard times, through the suffering. So I think all of this is part of self-responsibility, because you owe it to yourself to be passionate. You owe it to yourself to persevere through with fortitude. You owe it to yourself to actually act and try and live instead of just exist and watch your life pass you by. And you owe it to yourself to be realistic so that you don't, just, why aren't I achieving anything? Well, hey, if you want to learn how to play the guitar, don't expect that in a month you're going to be able to write and sing a song and produce a song. Like there's levels to this thing we call life. And be honest with yourself. And that's probably the hardest one, and it's probably the first step. You got to be honest with yourself. And that is so much easier said than done. It's something I'm trying to figure out with this channel, and we're all trying to figure out. But if you don't start, you won't be responsible for yourself, and you will not progress. So that's the main message of this video, guys. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of Jordan's message, and what you think of my thoughts, what you've been thinking while listening, and what you're doing, what you could add to this idea, any of the above, or etc. What else? Let me know in the comment section below. Sure, like the video if you want, share the video, and subscribe for plenty more videos. Hope you're having a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.